Call to order the City Council workshop meeting for July 14th, 2014. And it looks like everybody is here. I think Councilmember Cardinal called and he is going to be late. If we could have approval of the agenda. Not late enough.
So move.
I'll second.
Okay. Councilmember Coleman moves approval of the agenda, seconded by Councilmember Abrams. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
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 Okay. The agenda is approved. Their first item of business is to hear from, it says it was going to be Dewey Kaneko. I understand he's sick. So, Mr. Taylor, you're filling in for him tonight. And the HKGI consultant, is it Lil Leatham? To give us an update on the development of the park master plan. After Ms. Leatham's presentation, Jack Becker, Executive Director of the Forecast Public Art, will discuss the integration of public art throughout the city. So, Mr. Taylor, would you like to tell us about public art?
Well, Mayor, Council, we just wanted to have an opportunity to first give an update on where we're at in the park systems plan, and that's why Lil is here with HKGI. And then after that, we've asked Jack Becker, who's the Executive Director of Forecast Public Art, as he mentioned, just to come give an overview on kind of public art and why it's important to our community as a whole. So with that, we'll turn it over to Lil to go through the park systems plan update here.
Welcome to the council workshop.
All right, there we go. All right, thank you, Mayor and members of the council. As Jim mentioned, I'm here to give an update to you guys about where we are in the plan. And some of this might be review because I understand that Dewey and Jim gave an update since we've started. But what we're doing, the purpose of what we're doing is we're creating a strategic plan for park and recreation improvements and operations. And what we're really trying to do is make sure that the park system meets community needs now and into the future. And you did a community survey for Parks and Recreation, and it came out that really a lot of people are very happy now. It came out that 83% of households think physical conditions are great and good in the park. About 70% of households who have visited the parks, but there are some unmet needs for facilities, and that's mostly support facilities like restrooms and bathrooms and shade, and then also some specialty facilities like an off-leash dog area, skate park, top spin courts, so some specialty items that can be built into the system. And another thing we're trying to do through this process is to build champions for park and recreation and to enhance partnerships. So the elements of the plan are going to be strategies for parks, programs, greenways and open space, trails and bikeways, art, which is one of the reasons Jack's here, and then also ensuring that the system is sustainable, that you can match resources with community desires. We will have implementation recommendations. We'll identify priorities. We will make some recommendations about asset management. We'll do concepts and cost estimates for key projects. And we'll have a bunch of toolbox items to help guide into the future. We're about halfway through our process. We started in April, and we've completed the needs assessment, and we're about in the middle of establishing a vision. And we've taken a vision we had a vision workshop with the task force, and I'll share with you the draft vision. It has not gone to the Park and Recreation Council or Commission yet. We then are about to start creating the master plan, where we really get into what are the improvements, how do we take this vision from reality, and that's the phase that we're starting right now. And in September, October, we'll have a final master plan. So our needs assessment process, which again we just completed, we had a bunch of activities. First of all, we really built on the work that the task force did, the 2013-14 task force. And they did 7 community meetings last summer, and they also benchmarked against 4 other metro cities, and those were Inver Grove Heights, Cottage Grove, Roseville, and New Brighton. You had the Park and Recreation Citizen Survey by ETC, and that's a great resource for us. We've also done a distribution analysis of where the park resources, natural areas, and trails are within the city. We've looked at demographics, age and ethnicity primarily. We took a tour with staff. We compared your facilities and the numbers of facilities to existing standards for park facilities. We've looked at your plans, primarily your comp plan, that relate to parks and recreation. We've had some focus group meetings to cover what we saw as maybe some gaps or places we wanted more information that wasn't supplied by the survey or community meetings. And for those, we talked to athletic groups. We had an environmental resources focus group and an arts and culture focus group. We have looked at programs and talked to Audra about programs, and we've also done some trends evaluation. And then on July 4th, we had a booth at Hazelwood Park, and that's part of building awareness and creating champions. And I think we did outreach to some people who wouldn't be involved in the process had we not been at an event, and we'll be doing some other events later in the process. So the summary of needs is that you have excellent access to parks and natural areas. You've got a lot of trails, and they're great. There's some gaps, but people are in close proximity to the trail system. You really are a leader in natural area protection and sustainable development and maintenance practices. The community center is a great resource and well used. You have a staff that's really excited about making the park system even better. And there are a lot of existing park plans for individual parks that we can build on. For instance, Veterans Park and Gladstone Park. There are some needs, and a lot of these were identified through the meetings and this survey. A community destination park is desired, so one really nice focal point for the city. Increasing connectivity of the trail system. And then there's renovation of older parks, and the asset management fits into this of how are you going to replace and revitalize some of the older park facilities and amenities. There's a need for standardization across the system in things like signage, benches, and again, asset management. But there's also a desire for more unique parks that talk about the history and art and culture. So some things should be more standardized so you know you're in a city park, but some things should reflect the neighborhood and the residents around. Places for community gathering at all scales are wanted. And then continued leadership in natural resources and preservation. There's a need to remain financially sustainable over the long term. And then again, the idea of building champions. And again, the specialized facilities are also a need, like skate parks and disc golf. So we developed a vision framework which is based on the existing mission statement. There's a draft park and recreation vision statement, and then we went through and developed some principles to support the mission and vision. So I'm going to run through these very quickly, and again, they're still draft and in process. So the existing mission statement is that the Park and Recreation Department provides a community environment for all citizens to participate and enjoy cultural and recreational activities on an equitable basis. The vision statement goes on to say that Parks and Recreation is going to help create a vibrant community that embraces diversity, celebrates arts and culture, values health, wellness, and promotes stewardship of the environment. And then the draft principles support the mission and vision. So we've categorized the principles into, I think it's 6 categories. The first being that the park system needs to connect people and places. And that addresses creating a network of trails, creating community gathering spaces and places at all scales, so at the neighborhood level, but also a new community park. Preserving areas with historic value, connecting parks to natural areas, communication, so letting people in the community know about what's going on in parks and where resources are, and ensuring accessibility for all ages and abilities. We also want to encourage physical activity, and this directly draws on the vision by providing a mixture of activities, providing programs, offering recreation facilities and programmings at the community center, and expanding partnerships to make the city's dollars and reach go further. Promoting stewardship, again, you're already doing a great job, but preserving quality natural resources, completing the greenway and connecting to natural areas, increasing plant diversity is a goal, and encouraging green design and maintenance on private property as well as public. And that can be through the greenway system. Inspiring creativity and learning, and one of the things that has been identified is integrating public art, and Jack will talk a lot more about that. And then collaborating with other organizations for art and cultural activities. Again, teaching about nature and environmental stewardship, encouraging volunteerism, and educating residents about the quality of and benefits of park and recreation. Financial sustainability is another key principle. And so in the long term, ensuring that there's stable and sufficient funding and staff to achieve the mission and vision, building partnerships outside the city, volunteers are really important, and planning for the annual maintenance and replacement of facilities. And the last is that parks should be safe and welcoming, and that's, again, embracing all cultures and abilities, but doing that by really making sure our parks are well maintained and clean and safe, and facilities and programming are welcoming and speak to cultural diversity. So from here, we're going to take the vision and principles, refine them, and put the meat behind it. So figure out what they all mean and what the implications for the park system and the policies. And we will have some online input on the vision and principles at the end of July, mid-August. In July and September, we're going to be developing the draft plan. And we will have public open houses and online input probably mid-September. And again, we'll be wrapping up in October through December. So with that, do you have any questions at this point or comments?
No, I had a question about your slide on community destination. You know, we had a meeting this week with the 3 mayors in this area and 3 city managers, and you know, Oakdale always talks about how they're having band concerts at their band shell, and their band shell is their big deal, and that's where everybody gathers. I mean, when you talk about community destination, I mean, do you think it's something, you know, so now I think we need a band shell, right?
Right.
So is it that, or what makes it? And I know places like Maple Grove have these really sort of fancy parks.
Yeah, well, I mean, fancy park is one way to look at it. You know, one park that has high-quality facilities, that has things like, it might be a band shell. And at the 4th of July, we asked people what they would want in a community park, or what programming they would want. And music and movies in the park were the programs that people most mentioned. So a place that you wouldn't have to, you know, you can do a blow-up movie projector, or you can have a really informal band shell. You don't have to have a huge one. But the place where people know that your community gathering programs happen. And I think part of that is just having the support facilities, so the restrooms and the parking and the place for that to happen, whether it's how fancy it is. And I think having many things in that park also helps, like a skate park and tennis courts and gathering to bring people there.
So where I'm going with this is, do you think one of our parks is more amenable to being a community destination than any of the other parks?
Well, we have kind of a short list of ones that we're looking at, and are open to suggestions too, but we're thinking potentially Lyons, potentially Hazelwood, and what are the other 2, Joe? Goodrich and Wakefield. Those are the
what you're looking at?
Yeah,
Okay.
and honestly, we haven't started really beyond developing a list of ones to talk about, so if you have a park that you think would be appropriate.
Well, you know, Hazelwood does come to mind just because of the 4th of July event, and it's so big. You know, there's almost separate portions of the park and those types of things. But, you know, Lyons, Wakefield, and what was the last one?
Mayor Council, Lyons probably wasn't on that list because
Okay,
the size.
it's too small.
Goodrich and Wakefield were the other 2 that we've
Goodrich,
discussed.
Okay, good.
It's probably too small.
Councilmember Juenemann.
On that particular topic, while Hazelwood does come to mind, there's already so much going on there, and there's so many things that are, if you will, predestined to happen there, like where else are you going to put that much soccer? Maybe we should be looking at someplace like Wakefield that needs, if you pardon the pun, a reawakening. It might be a way to create a new interest in that. I mean, 100 years ago when I was a kid, Wakefield was more of a gathering place, and way back, that's where they had the fireworks and all that type of thing. And because it doesn't have as much to offer right now, it might be a place to look. Could we do a small amphitheater? Could we give that place new life by making it a gathering spot? Hazelwood already is, and
Yeah.
and I think there might be a limit to how much more we can cram into Hazelwood, actually. But, I understand wanting a lot of things in the same place, but Hazelwood has this reputation for soccer, it has this reputation for the fireworks, and in my mind, there'd be no reason to move those out of there. But if you're looking for a new gathering place to have new activities, you might want to look at Wakefield, because it's kind of hanging there from the times past.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Mr. Taylor?
Mayor, members of the council, and as we've kind of been going through this, we've talked a lot about Wakefield as kind of this park in transition. It's not being used what it was built for. It's built to be this athletic park, and it's not what it's being used for, and it never really fit the model of an athletic park. So we do see Wakefield as a park that's kind of a blank slate. The watershed wants to work with us directly on Wakefield too, because they have some vested interest because of the lake there and stuff. So Wakefield will be a hot topic of discussion for us over the next year or so.
Good. And I've also understand that Wakefield has some potential for some cultural programming, so maybe the Tulu courts and so forth could go there, perhaps.
Yeah, and I just also want to clarify that it doesn't have to be a big park. We've worked on a park in the city of Elk River downtown that was just a lot, basically, and created a performance space there that's well-loved and so popular that people set up chairs in the middle, in the middle of the day, so.
So keeping our options open?
Yeah.
Might be a good idea, okay. Councilmember Copeland?
The one on Beam, that's a big area, and that's kind of underutilized, isn't it?
A beam?
Yeah.
Mr. Taylor?
Councilmember Copeland, I'm assuming you're talking about Maplewood Heights?
Yeah, the one just north of Beam, by the Maple Mall.
Yep, there's a large area there. It's not very flat, it's very hilly, so you're kind of limited in what you could probably do there. The other thing, yeah, it's a possibility. I mean, I think we're open to all these different areas right now. I think we've just talked about kind of the Goodrich because it's getting ready to be redeveloped, and Wakefield because it's prime for redevelopment, as the two we've focused on at this point. And why Hazelwood was kind of in the mix is it's kind of got that natural bowl feel on that lower field down at 2 where an amphitheater might make sense because you have the seating on the hill and those things.
So people could sit up and still be able to see, and you could do those types of things. Yep. I had another question about your online input, or just getting input. Actually, what I really was wondering is how we give input. Is your online going to just give an online address and then anybody can write in?
Well, usually we do something through SurveyMonkey and ask specific questions and try and keep it fairly short. And you would be able to give input, but we've just been finding that so many more people are willing to fill out an online questionnaire than to come to a community meeting, that it gives you a lot of input for the effort, basically.
Do you have a targeted number of responses you're looking for?
No, it's not a statistically, we want a lot, but it's not a statistically valid survey or anything. It's just we're trying to get the pulse of what people think. So we'll do email blasts and posters and try and get the word out. And we get anywhere in the range from 50 to almost 1,000. We had one for the Nokomis master plan that we're working on, and that got TV coverage, so it bumped the numbers. That was astronomical. But sometimes we get as little as 50. I would expect us to get a couple hundred, honestly.
So some kind of goal.
Yeah.
Because when the mail-in survey, we got how many?
I don't remember I think it was 5. Was it 500, Jim? 600? 627.
Okay. So something comparable. So it was online input, and then what was the other way people could get input? Was there?
We will have community open houses
Okay.
for the draft plan. We will have more than one in different locations and different times to try and capture as many people. And then we did the July event, and then there's also a race that we're gonna, in the fall, a running race, the 5K, I think,
Yep.
that we'll have a booth at also. And that's nice because we can capture people who just, it's easy for us to get the people who are engaged with the park system and the supporters, but we can talk to people who may not be aware or interested at different events otherwise.
That's what I think is the challenge, is just to make sure that everybody feels heard and that they have our opportunity. It does sound like you're between this survey and the online survey and the going out to events and being at the 4th of July. It sounds like you've done some really good outreach. So,
Yeah,
good.
we're trying to get as much as possible. So we're also open to other event opportunities too.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So our second, let's see, we're going to hear from Jack Becker. Where is it? Jack Becker, who's the Executive Director of Forecast Public Art. So welcome to the meeting. We look forward to your presentation.
Hi. Can you hear me okay?
I'm not so sure it's on.
How about now?
That's better. Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council. It's great to be here. I'm going to go through these slides rather quickly. The first set I have is actually printed out and in your packets, the first section. And I don't really want you to spend time reading slides, but there are a couple we might pause at. And then I also brought some materials to hand out. So before I leave, I'll make sure you get copies. So just a little bit about Forecast. We're a nonprofit organization, 36 years old now, and we support artists through grants. We do consulting work, of course, and we also publish Public Art Review magazine, which I brought some copies of to share with you. Been doing that for 25 years now. So the magazine and our grant program and consulting, and we also have an education program. We started helping educators develop curriculum in schools that bring these public art and design concepts into classrooms so kids can start thinking about the community around them way before they get out of school as a place that they can actually influence and help create the kind of places they like. But what is public art? And this is a question I get asked most often. And I don't think of it as an art form, but rather this multifaceted field of inquiry. It's very much experimentation, not unlike medicine or science, in which artists and their creativity are starting to explore the public realm and explore it in lots of different ways. And of course, there's lots of creative expression that's going on, and we'll look at examples of these, from memorials and monuments to installations, flash mobs. There's over 350% for art programs in municipalities, states, and counties around the country. You'll see on this map, most of them are on the West Coast. There's several in Minnesota. So the state has a percent for art program. Minneapolis and St. Paul have different kinds of programs. St. Cloud, Duluth. And there's all kinds of reasons why you might engage in the field of public art as a city in terms of getting people to think about their built environment, to become stewards of the built environment. It can also address all kinds of issues. So it isn't just about beautifying the community. Again, I'm just going to just cruise through some of these because you have these and you can look over some of these on your own. But there are lots of characteristics to contemporary public art that I would say in the last 15 or 20 years distinguish it from what we used to think of as murals, monuments, and memorials. And that was public art. And now there's process-oriented projects and artists in residence and artists contributing to environmental causes. In fact, there's an artist in residence with the Watershed District that's responsible for some of the art that's happening now at, say, Maplewood Mall, where you've got some great examples, not only of good public art, but teaches kids environmental stewardship at the same time. So public art is often a means to an end, not an end in itself. And to determine what ends it should serve in Maplewood, it's really asking what are criteria for public art here. We could go from the very permanent to the very ephemeral. So even your 4th of July fireworks could be considered a public art event. And fireworks and pyrotechnics go back millennia as an art form. It's just we don't call them public art anymore. So there's a vocabulary issue here. There's also a range of very public spaces to fairly private spaces that are accessible to the public where art is happening. So public art isn't necessarily publicly funded. In fact, a lot of public art that's happening in the Twin Cities right now is privately funded or public-private partnerships. And there are lots of trends in the field. Some of them are listed here, and they're also covered in the magazine, and you'll be able to look at those on your own. The amount of time that anyone spends with public art, from a 15-minute fireworks display to something like a veterans memorial where they want to spend time, this is another factor. It's really an experience that we're talking about. And public artists, like park designers in a sense, are in the experience business. So a lot of the ordinances that cities have adopted around the country are becoming outmoded. They're mostly percent for art and coming out of capital budgets, and they're restricted to bricks and mortar commissioning of permanent fixed artwork that needs long-term maintenance and care. But what's happening in the field, of course, are street art and flash mobs and social media events, lighting projections, things that aren't categorized as capital improvements that need long-term maintenance. And so my hope would be to broaden the kinds of policies and ordinances that cities adopt so that they're more inclusive of the kinds of work artists are doing in communities, and thinking about ways to engage the community in the process of making public art. So it isn't something that the artist just shows up and installs and the community's wondering, how did that get there? And who's responsible? And who do I call at City Hall about this? But rather the community was involved with the artist in the process, and they're excited and anticipating. They help co-create the work. And so these are just some examples of different ways communities can be involved in the process. And of course, there are a lot of issues to face, including the fact that we don't hear about public art in the schools. So our kids are coming out of school not really knowing what is this field of design and public art. Media doesn't necessarily help us learn about public art. And there's not really an agreed upon standard in this field. Shared vocabulary is a problem. Artists certainly are not the highest paid professionals. And there's always a risk, you know? You're not going to make everybody happy with public art. It's just a guaranteed presumption here. But there are other risks, and they're all being dealt with all the time by communities around the country. So the advantage of getting into this field now is you can learn from everybody else's mistakes. You can see the best ordinances that are working, the best artist contracts that have been written, and you can benefit from all the learning that's gone on up till now. There's so many different forms that public art can take, and I have slides of lots of examples. But I also want to tell you briefly, there's lots of ways to fund public art too. And so these are just a few examples of ways in which cities around the country have discovered and are using to support not just public art, but arts and cultural programming. So Toronto has a billboard tax, and in California, a license plate fee. Many cities have hotel-motel taxes that they use. There's also re-granting programs. So for example, Forecast, my organization, gets grants from McKnight Foundation and Jerome Foundation, which then we re-grant to individual artists who want to do projects at sites of their choosing anywhere in the state. So you could have a micro grant program for artists here that foundations support, and it's for artists to create temporary projects around Maplewood. And those are great examples of ways to help artists learn how to work in the field, and audiences to develop vocabulary and appreciation for public art without the risk of long-term maintenance and liability issues that come with permanent capital investments. Other ways to raise money, percent of private development fees, like St. Louis Park is using right now to underwrite a number of major public art projects. In Portland, Oregon, they have a tax on golf. You rent a golf bag, it's $1, goes into an arts fund. Graffiti abatement funds, there's actually more money being spent removing graffiti in this country than commissioning public art. So if you think about it, the offenders are actually these would-be public artists, and if you can spend money on public art in advance of graffiti being done, you might avert the problem. In other words, if you can help steer that creativity towards something positive. Corporate sponsorships, there's really a lot of opportunities for private investment. Gifts, there are a number of gift policy examples of people who might have works or contribute to, say, a memorial that you want to create. And let's not forget bartering. Artists are looking for space. You might have raw space. In exchange, they might offer to do some work with educators and students in your schools. And there's a lot of interesting ways you can make things happen. And there's lots of ways, of course, to consider integrating art into the park system. And some of these kinds of suggestions you'll see in the draft report and recommendations made during the work we're doing with HKGI. But let's talk about some of the actual artwork. And just so you know, the Eiffel Tower and the Statue of Liberty and Diego Rivera murals and other projects, even the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, while we all think of them as hugely successful, renowned projects, they were all very controversial when they were first proposed or installed. So if we shy away from controversy, we might also miss out on the opportunity to create the kinds of, beloved landmarks that we want in our community. And sometimes it just takes a while before they become beloved. Even the Vietnam's Veterans Memorial was very contested when it was first installed. Now it's the most popular memorial in the country with 10,000 visitors a day. And they've set up a whole warehouse museum just for all the articles that have been left at the base of the memorial from people who want to honor loved ones, and they leave things there.
Don't forget Mount Rushmore, dude.
Well, that was pretty controversial, too. Yeah, I mean, who wants to be left off of, Washington, the Mount Rushmore? Richard Serra's Tilted Arc was very controversial, and the public actually forced its removal from the Federal Plaza in New York. So it shows you that the public is really the final arbiter of public art, and if the public doesn't want it, it's not going to last. So engaging the community in the process of design and creation is often one way to avoid those, whiplash effects of how did that get there? We don't want that, and take it out. Sometimes it's about temporary projects, even on a scale like this with Christo and Jean-Claude and the running fence in California, 22 miles long, and it was only up for 2 weeks. And then all the materials were donated to the ranchers that allowed their land to be used for this project. And folk art, like the Watts Tower in Los Angeles or Paul and Babe in Bemidji, these become instant landmarks, and this one, since 1937, is still the tourist spot in Bemidji. Sculptures can also create environments, and the idea of placemaking is becoming an important trend now. And we talk about a community park and a place that's a destination. Placemaking is really at the heart of that concept, and what makes a good place. Glass is being used in a lot of projects now, much more so than just stained glass of the old days, partly because of the new technologies that are out there. And street art has become more legitimate in ways that we can't really list in this short meeting. Street painting, you see this more in California and in Florida, but painting right on the street and attracting a crowd and being part of a festival environment is becoming pretty trendy. Transforming parking garages into murals, this is in downtown Minneapolis.
I love it.
Adding lights to a building can give it a distinction. I mean, you can just imagine this building without anything on it. It's totally forgettable. And now it's the lights that draw you to it. And this is in Tampa, where they've sort of declared themselves the city of lights. And they're starting to do all kinds of lighting projects. Here's a bridge project in Wichita. Undersides of bridges, these are notorious spaces in any community, but even with just creative lighting on those surfaces, you can transform them. Or projections onto buildings, including historic buildings that you can't really do any artwork on because of their historic stature. Light bulbs can be used. Water features are important, although I don't recommend outdoor fountains in Minnesota. It's just not practical. These temporary waterfalls were set up in the East River in New York, and the mayor's goal was to get more developers to look at the East River. And these projects brought millions of people to explore the East River of Manhattan that really had paid no attention to it before. So it was public art as a means to an end. This is going to attract development. They're going to see the East River in ways they haven't before. Here's a way of augmenting a fountain with a temporary installation with fabric, or creating sculptural, architectural gathering places, creating venues for other things to happen, for meetings to occur, storytelling for schools and youth groups, performances. This is a HUD home in Houston that was going to be torn down anyway. So the artist ripped out all the floorboards and the wood from inside the house and turned it into this kind of temporary stage in the community. This is right downtown Minneapolis near the library with stone seating and sculptural elements along the widened sidewalk of Nicollet Mall. And other functional elements. You don't have to buy a bench out of a catalog. So this one's made out of coins. Here's a railing, a bike rack, tree grate. Even the ground plane is an opportunity for artistic expression. I love this project in Seattle. It's dance instructions just embedded in the sidewalks of Seattle, and people come along and, well, they'll just start dancing for no apparent reason to the observer from a distance, you know, but you have to get up close and personal. Even chain link fences, which everybody hates, can become surfaces on which art can happen, even temporarily. So if you have a construction site, what's an opportunity? Turn the liability into an asset. Here's another construction site with scaffolding and netting material around the scaffolding, which can also be used for digital printing now. And again, this is because of new technologies that weren't available even 15 years ago. Vacant storefronts can be turned into art opportunities, so they don't have to just be forlorn and vacant looking. And they're much more likely to attract development and tenants with something going on in them, or even showing from the outside, than if there's just a for rent sign and it stays there forever. So it's a win-win-win deal because the artist is getting exposure, the building's going to get rented sooner, and the community ends up with an economic engine there. Temporary projects with materials found on the site. This might be a really interesting opportunity for artists in residence in Maplewood parks. Explore what can be done with the leaves and the sticks and the icicles that you find on site, like Andy Goldsworthy's project here, that he managed to wrap these icicles around a tree trunk by using his own saliva to weld them together around a tree trunk. They didn't last for more than a few seconds, but long enough to get a picture. Or using cables overhead, stretching some fabric or netting to create a really dramatic installation. This one in Vancouver. Or this one over a plaza in St. Paul where kids set up a weekend youth farm market. And so it made sense to have artists work with kids to create these unedible food sculptures, sort of piñata style, as a canopy over the plaza where this weekend event happens. It not only provided a little shade, but it definitely made the atmosphere more festive. And it got the youth working with artists. So I mean, it had all of these values added to it. And I'm really interested in the ways that public art can find multiple functions and multiple values. These books are hanging or flying overhead near the City Lights bookstore in San Francisco. This is in St. Louis Park as part of their West End development. Participatory culture. So this is the idea of a mural artist made, in this case Candy Chang, that the community completes by filling in the blank. Before I die, I want to, and here's the chalk right here, you can write it in. And then you see what your neighbors want to do before they die, what's on your bucket list. And it creates this portrait of the community and their values and their wishes. And of course, it's been translated in different languages and made into a kit that people can order all over the world. So a very simple way of tapping into sort of the consciousness of a community. The AIDS quilt, which no longer fits on the Capitol Mall, but it's made of over 75,000 quilts that honor people who've been stricken with AIDS or HIV, made by community members. So again, Public art isn't always something made by artists for communities. It can be made by community members for themselves and as a remembrance or other participatory activities. So there are blank quilts as part of the installation that allow people to write their own remembrances when they arrive at the site. And billboards can certainly be used for things other than advertising. Pathways can be more than just functional ways to get from one place to another. Sculptures don't have to just be plop art. They could actually be related to, well, this is, near Wall Street in Manhattan. You're most likely going to see somebody doing that in that area. So rather than just plop an artwork somewhere just because it might look good in the studio and think that's going to beautify a public space, for me it's about helping think about the context, the environment, the history of the site, who uses the site in the design of a work for that site. Like a playground in Chicago that begs repeated viewing and closer inspection. Or another play sculpture that's not out of a catalog. Or installation on a wall of a park building in South Minneapolis that reflects the different cultures. An underwater sculpture park that's actually restoring an ecosystem near the coral reefs near Cancun. These are cast concrete figures from people on the ground. This actually uses buckthorn, and a committee removing buckthorn turns it into a sculpture. It's a win-win deal. And right here at your own Maplewood Mall, these just got installed last month, and this one turns when the stormwater off the roof of this facility goes through a channel. It starts to spin and make noise with a original composition that was designed just for this piece. And on the other side, an incredible interactive art project and a mosaic tile wall that's quite spectacular. I mean, you're already starting out with some excellent projects, and they're addressing environmental stewardship, which I think is an excellent theme to consider, especially in light of parks and stewardship and taking care of those environments. So there's the mural. How am I doing for time? Large environmental projects, again, using materials that's going to, say, decompose over time, or using parking spaces for something other than parking. This is on International Parking Day in September every year. And you plug the meter and you create your own park, and you're not breaking the law. And Chicago, of course, Millennium Park has started a trend in urban sculpture parks, and I don't know how many there are now, but it's just because they become a magnet for cultural tourism. People want to come here. The rents go up if you are building or trying to rent space around Millennium Park. So it becomes an economic engine, and just doesn't seem to quit. Billions of dollars have been generated for Chicago since this was finished. What to do with used cars? There's an artist who will think of an idea, I'm sure. And any raw material. So when you think about public art, you think about budgets, one idea is simply to repurpose materials that otherwise are going to end up in a landfill and see what kinds of projects can happen there. Or this is a fun project using inflatable tentacles. I don't know, I guess you can have these made. And this project is called Octopied, in a vacant building in France. But this is going to get attention, right? And you could take this on the road and find other uses, and they could come out of one of the lakes in your parks, and there'd be media coverage, I guarantee you. And so social media is becoming an important component of public art and interpretation about it. Art car parades, have any of you been to any art car parades? There's actually one coming up in Minneapolis around, I think it's Lake Harriet? No, Lake Calhoun.
Usually goes with Bastille Day, doesn't it?
Well, actually, it's the last day of Aquatennial, so it's July 26th at 6 p.m. if you're interested this year. And Jan Elfman, who drives the car in the upper left there, she organizes the art car parade in Minneapolis. And there are a lot of art car artists in this town. And they're being mobile. It means they can come to Maplewood just as easily as they can go to Minneapolis. Here's a great one for Maplewood, because this is made with Post-it notes. And what do you do with Post-its? You write down your to-do thing. So this is a mural about to-do, and people would write on them what they want to do as part of a participation in that. And this is a mobile photo booth that artists created. They could take to different parks and festivals. This is a project that involved community gardening, which turned into a community kitchen, which turned into kind of a community center that had food and gardening and people gathering that didn't get together beforehand. And it grew out of a need for communal space because they just lacked it. You don't have the problem of having communal spaces. It's how to make them socially engaged, and people want to use them and they want to come back and they want to bring their kids. But placemaking can be something intimate like this landscaped environment, or this a grotto at the Public Works facility near Seattle. People love this place so much they actually schedule weddings there. Now, you know you've achieved success with placemaking when people schedule their weddings at the place. But you could see part of it is the charm of something like this grotto that feels very special and unique, not out of any catalog. Of course, it takes time. It's a lot of labor and craftsmanship. And so, yes, it costs money to do these things, but this is what really distinguishes a place. So, there's a big return on this kind of investment. Or even using shipping containers or recycling them to create places like this pop-up cultural park in a parking lot in Caracas, Venezuela. And performance public art isn't just visual art, so performance art and flash mob events. This was a dance troupe that took a flatbed truck on the road and went to festivals around the state and did their performances using the truck as their stage. And I don't know if you've heard of Burning Man, but this has become an annual festival in the Nevada desert of all places. And people are building things all year to take out there to burn at this festival. And I'm not suggesting you do a Burning Man festival here, but maybe something on a frozen lake in the middle of winter, Or a May Day parade, which again has become hugely popular in South Minneapolis. And again, fireworks. So you may not know it, you're already spending money on public art if you're investing in fireworks. I'm not sure if you want to share that thought with the rest of your constituents, but it's partly because people don't have the mindset that fireworks is this kind of spectacle, art form. And why does it draw so many people for such a short period of time? It might be worth thinking about what can you do to capitalize on the fireworks you're already doing with other activities, with other art forms, with things that happen during the day leading up to. And just to let you know, as a postscript, there's a toolkit on our website that has lots of additional resource materials. And I'm glad to answer any questions.
Councilmember Juenemann?
Well, it was a ways back in your presentation, but it made me think of what we're trying to do now has been tried in the past and kind of failed, but we're trying to get some kind of continuity and communication going between school district and city. In our case, it's school districts, multiple, and city, and now we're having this parks plan, and it just seems to me that there has to be some way that you create some strings between the different pieces. And I really think that art forms could be one of the starting places when you have kids involved. And especially if we could get someone to help with bringing it to the schools, because everything you bring to a school has to have appeal that costs no money. Otherwise they go, we don't have time for that. But it seems to me we could do some kind of as long as we're looking at talking with the school districts, that we would like the kids to be part of enhancing our community, that this is a new time to try something of that nature, and for them to be exposed to the different kinds of things they could be part of. Because a lot of it is just, with kids especially, is they haven't seen it before. And if they do, it doesn't take a lot to enthuse little kids in particular. They just think, oh, that'd be cool. They don't need to be convinced. But then it's up to us to kind of create an atmosphere. And I just think at a time when we're doing a parks plan and we're also trying to establish communication with the schools that makes some sense and has some inclusivity in between organizations, I think we need to try and pursue something like that.
Well, I totally agree, and I think there's ways to connect those threads with almost any project. The first thing that we like to do is find teachers that are interested in having some interaction and learn what their teaching goals are, because you can usually find some kind of project that involves art or a teaching artist that connects with that teaching goal. So it doesn't look like this other thing that's not important or a frill, but rather this could actually help us do the thing we were trying to do already. And once you get to that point where it has that extra value to educators, it's a little bit easier then to, let's take the class, we're going to go see this, we're going to go do these other things. And if it is funded outside of the school budget, of course, that always makes it attractive.
Yeah, and I think the creativity piece is different when kids think they're going to be making something that the community is going to see than just within the walls of the school. It's a whole different mindset for a child, too.
Well, and a great byproduct is that their parents come along with,
Yes.
and then they're exposed to and they learn about in a way that they wouldn't if you were trying to address them directly.
Councilmember Copeland.
You didn't have an ice castle in there.
I didn't show an ice castle, you're right, but we should keep
Ice
that.
castle in there. The other thing I was going to bring up, you were talking about art in the schools. The Lions Clubs do this peace poster contest every year. And a local girl, I think it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago, went to either national or international with her peace poster. But it
So
doesn't,
it's every year?
yeah. But the news media doesn't pick up on it a lot. So a lot of people don't really understand about these programs that are going on. We need to get more exposure in the news media about these things.
So I had a question about a couple of things. One is, you know, with the legacy funding and everything that's passed with that, I mean, wouldn't you consider that there's now significantly more art projects available and available to kids? And how are you connected with any of those legacy funding programs? We were looking at some of the cultural funding from that here for Tulu, things like that. I suppose we could get legacy grants for the arts as well. And then if you could weave into that, I think it was interesting that you proposed various taxes to fund arts and very different ways to do it. And typically, so do you see cities doing that? So how about the legacy? What about cities? And
Well, we are blessed in Minnesota with a lot of private philanthropy and now increased public support, thanks to the Legacy Amendment. I mean, the State Arts Board gets additional funding, the regional arts councils get additional funding, and they do pass that along in different ways. And the Historical Society and the parks and trails, you know, there's several angles, not just the arts, that could benefit from legacy funding. I know we're working with a couple of other cities that have leveraged legacy money for, you know, remediation of sites to prepare them so they can be, you know, put into use for recreation, for example. So clean water and land is part of that, and they got the cultural thing into that by calling it legacy, not art. And I thought that was brilliant strategy, because who's against legacy, you know? But when you think about what is preserving our legacy and what is our culture and how do we preserve it and what are the forms that takes, I mean, art fits into that in different ways. It's difficult to tap into legacy funding, though, is what I've discovered. And so you need help, you need the right vehicle and the people who know the right connections to what avenues are appropriate. But the Arts Board is one for arts organizations to apply to. Libraries can apply in their own categories for legacy money to do programming through the libraries. I'm sure the Watershed District and parks can probably access some of it for, you know, ecosystem remediation, and, you know, that you can combine these things in different ways. In terms of other sources of funding, the private sector, I think, still rules in terms of funding for the arts, and public-private partnerships are really the answer now for public art strategies. I'm not proposing taxes, I was just giving you options of things to consider, because if it's working somewhere else, they obviously figured out how to do it, and if they can do it, you can do it. But usually it comes down to political will and community participation and how much people value those things. You know, as far as a starting point, I think probably a task force is going to be needed in terms of arts and culture for Maplewood as a whole. But on the short term, I think having some successful demonstration projects through some of these park opportunities and things you're already investing in makes the most sense. And then having some educational component that raises broader awareness among the community about what it is you're doing with public art and what value it adds. So you start to raise awareness, understanding, eventually appreciation among a larger population of the people who elect elected officials. And therefore, it becomes easier when you're seeking support to say, now we want to do this in a serious, more comprehensive way.
And so, if you all don't know, my brother's an artist, so grew up with a lot of art and have a lot of art, and he does mosaics, and so some of the things that you showed in your slides. And so I think of things like, we have community issues around Vista Hills and Edgerton Parks with, basketball players, the community, stuff like that. Do you think if you did public arts and those kinds of spaces that it would bring the community together to sort of maybe I don't know if the basketball players and the kids do it together, but perhaps the community does something, or just that it's in that sort of space that sort of makes it friendlier somehow? Has that been used?
I usually just say yes to everything because I've seen so many examples of creative ways people have addressed these issues, whether it's cultural diversity and there's a race issue going on, some kind of other, heated topic that really involves something other than that topic to bring the groups together to have something more neutral or fun or creative to work on. That changes the conversation, right?
That's what I was thinking, is could you change this dynamic somehow? And
I have no
it's been
doubt
difficult.
there's a way, but it would require some deep diving into, well, what are some of those things? What are the opportunities? What are the resources? And who might be willing to participate at what levels? Not every artist is cut out to do community engagement, as we already know, right? And not every educator wants to get involved in the arts either. So, you look for kind of the low-hanging fruit when you start out. Where are the projects we could have some success? And demonstrate, how a transformation of a site or a cultural situation could be turned around.
Councilmember Juenemann?
This is actually more a question for us to be thinking about, but if we're going to start something like this, quite often it's a good idea to be an example. And to be quite honest, the front of our city hall looks pretty sad. And I'm not just talking about the landscaping, which is fairly sad. It's a little more spruced up than it used to be, but, the use of light even to call attention to the fact that this is City Hall and just, when something's going to go on in the city, that you would have your banner and then you would have some kind of light display that went on for, let's say, a week or even 2 weeks around it to call attention to it and to say that we're a little more progressive. I hate to say it, but I'd much rather be going and sitting in the City Hall at Bad and Sights than I would here every other Monday. They're just really pretty, because they made use of wood and art and that type of thing in making it. And so this is an old building that needs a little help, but can't redo and be other people, but we could make some use of some of these kinds of things just to spruce ourselves up a little and start to give the message that this is the kind of community we're looking toward being.
I think
Just
those
a
are great
thought.
ideas. Maybe Chief Schnell and Ms. Guilfoyle and their new deal out there could incorporate some art. Yeah, see,
Karen's gonna be.
in charge of that. Okay, it might be interesting to just do something, or in here, right?
Out there.
We'll get a grant or something and do that. Yeah.
It's boring, and here we are trying to promote interest in art, and we walk in here, and all we have is the eternal maple leaves. Not that that's bad,
Right.
but it looks kind of lonely to begin with, and it's been there for 100 years. So, if we could do something that gave the message that we're trying to be more culturally and artistically aware.
Good ideas. Councilmember Cardinal.
Thank you, Mayor. Jack, I was at your presentation about a year ago at Urban Currents. And what came to mind here is, remember the Charles Schultz, how that all came about? And I was out in California, just north of San Francisco, Santa Ana. Is that where Charles Schultz's deal is?
I think you're right.
Yeah, and they had, that's a huge tourist thing. Nice tribute to Charles Schultz, who was from St. Paul. So maybe you would know, how did that Charles Schultz thing start off here where, you know, they were all over the city?
Mr. Becker.
I'll be blunt. I think it was after he died, the city of St. Paul decided to capitalize
Yes.
on his
Oh,
fame
Oh,
and commissioned these fiberglass sculptures to be painted by artists and then auctioned off at the end of each round.
okay.
It was so successful the first year, they decided to keep doing it. And by the 5th year, I think people were pretty much ready to be done with the different characters, so they ended up putting them into a fund and created these bronze, permanent Peanuts characters around Rice Park and Landmark Center.
Okay.
So you can see those permanent fixtures. They later went on and I think did dinosaurs in honor of the Science Museum's 100th anniversary or something. But, you know, these plastic flora and fauna around the country are quite a trend. From Austin, Minnesota, which you can imagine what they're, you know, it's just, it's a one-liner, you know, and it is fun. Families like to go and take pictures, and kids like this stuff. But I think you could take it a little further artistically. And I just think, you know, there's ways the city could have, you know, promoted the fact that Charles Schultz came from that community before he died, rather than wait till after. That was my only hang-up about it.
Yeah.
But it still became a very popular thing, and the city, it was building on something that had been done years before that in Chicago with cows. They have these painted cows on parade throughout Chicago, and it was actually designed as an economic, you know, stimulator, because you could get people to shop on Michigan Avenue, but if you had cows dotted along, and then 2 blocks off, so you could see another cow off the avenue, you'd go and walk further off the main corridor and do some shopping or eating over there. And it did wonders for their economic, you know, picture. And then they had the cause part of it. So at the end, we're going to auction these off for some, you know, cure for cancer or some other, you know, tug at your heartstrings cause. And they actually raised money for those causes through this art. So it was definitely art as a means to an end, not an end in itself.
And my kids and I spent a summer, we have little photo albums of pictures with all of those. Remember that?
Yeah,
We would go around and find all of them, and it was a big deal.
Scavenger hunt, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you could do that with another kind of art project, though, and I think that is an interesting way to help with wayfinding and discovery of. And now there's social media things like, what are the smartphone things that you can use to go find clues that lead you to others?
QRF codes.
Geocaching.
Yeah.
Other parks are starting to explore this idea. There's a whole subculture that wants to go do that on their weekends. I think it's really interesting. And if you can appeal to young people, I mean, that's really the key, isn't it? You can appeal to young people, it usually spreads to the community. If you can find something that they feel really engaged in, which usually relates to something to do with culture or fashion or music, right? Then everything can grow from that point. So the idea of music kind of venue is, I think, really interesting. But to just put a regular band shell, I would say that's falling short of the opportunity that you have in front of you.
Well, there you go. Something bigger than a regular band shell. I grew up going to a regular band shell, and that was the center of our community. So but it's an interesting idea to make it different. I think we'll have Councilmember Abrams, and then we'll start to wrap up.
Thanks. Thank you for your presentation. It was really very, very good. I enjoyed all of the slides. You mentioned that there's a toolkit on your website. What's the purpose of the toolkit? Because what I'm thinking now, we all are really very interested in some of the suggestions that you have made to us tonight. You know, I want to suggest that this lovely copper sculpture back here, along with what Kathy was saying, this might be moved outside and repurposed into something that maybe fits a little bit better than, I mean, it's been here, I don't even know how long it's been here, but maybe, how many? Probably 25 years. Maybe we could repurpose it, but it's copper, and maybe we could do something outside to kind of do something different. Anyway, our whole idea about repurposing, but the toolkit, you know, it's great to listen to something like this, and then what is the process? How do we get started on finding something that is unique to our community, you know, not copying something from someone else, but really finding something that's unique to our community that fits in, and makes us
I get
unique.
first
Right.
dibs.
Is that what the toolkit is designed to do?
Well, the toolkit is just a great, resource for all kinds of things. It has case studies in there. It has a glossary of terms. It has sample calls for artists and sample contracts. So if you were getting into a program, either as an artist or a startup program, you'd be able to find examples and stories about and the different phases that projects go through and some of the issues. It's just a great starting point. But for this community, I've actually been talking with, with Jim and Dewey about helping look at public art opportunities in the parks that are coming up on your list to add value to the investment you're already planning to make. So I hope that makes sense, because I want to make sure it's customized to Maplewood and unique to the culture and the situation you have here. And so this is why having a consultant who's had 35 years experience in the field can help your community move to the front instead of start at the very basics of program development. There are some things that I would look at that are short term to give you a sense of accomplishment and demonstrate to others, like this. And then there's some long-range thinking about what sorts of policies or vision or long-term goals might be appropriate, and what are ways to actually be able to implement those long-term. And I know right now you don't have a Friends of the Arts like St. Louis Park has, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a group of people in Maplewood who might be interested in that kind of a group if they knew that it had some teeth, it could get things done. Or
Some type of an outlet for them?
that they could be in advisory capacity. I don't know. I mean, there's lots of great examples of what's already working out there that I think you could find something that works for Maplewood that would then help cultivate and review and be an ad hoc group that you could refer these ideas to instead of coming up with one at a time, what to do out front, what with this wall. You don't really want to spend your council time, I don't think, trying to figure out all these solutions, but you might want to be able to have a group that works on that and come back to you with recommendations that you can say, we did our homework and here's what we think.
So it sounds like Councilmember Abrams, maybe you talked about a task force, right? At
Well,
some
something
point.
like that. It may be something similar to what you've done with other initiatives you want to get off the ground, but you need a group to help, give you the feedback and the
Facilitate that.
community representation that would help you make informed decisions.
Good, good. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very helpful and very interesting.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
As our last item, two more items. Let's see. The next one is a review of the zoning and status of the current city-owned parcels for sale by Acting City Manager Melinda Coleman. And so she's going to give her presentation, and then after that, we will have the presentation on the conduct of city business. So, Ms. Coleman.
No.
No, it's on. Yeah, it's
Yep,
on.
okay. Mayor and council, thank you. I wanted to give you an update on something that I have been working on with our broker, Mike Brass, with regard to our city-owned parcels. We have the 3 fire station parcels, one of which we believe we have sold, but that leaves 2, the fire station on McMenemy and the fire station on London Lane. In addition to that, we have the Van Dyke parcel, which is right down the street, and we also have the convenience store on Highway 61, but that one is zoned commercial, so we believe we're in pretty good shape there. One of the things that I have noticed since we put the signs up on these properties is that we're getting a lot of calls, but people don't know what they can do with them. And the fire stations and the Van Dyke piece are still zoned residential, single-family residential or farm. And the comp plan is guiding them as government. So we have ourselves a little hamstrung when people call to ask about the parcels. We can't really tell them what could go there. We can tell them what we think might fit in the neighborhood or might not, would be objectionable to the neighbors, but we really don't have that strategy. And I think if you look back to the meeting that we had with ULI, one of the things that they shared with us is that they're successful if they're focused and they know what they're going to go after. So Mike and I were talking about this, and we really believe that we should think about taking a more proactive approach with those parcels and look at what the zoning might, what zoning might be best for those. Now, the property down on London Lane, we did have a proposal, you remember, for multifamily housing, but that wasn't, the zoning was not in place yet. We waited to do that zoning application along with the TIF application and the other things, so that never got done when the developer went away. The zoning is still farm and government, guided as government. So we're thinking, and this is something I just wanted to bounce off of the council tonight, is taking each of the sites that we have, those 3 sites, and actually going out and meeting with the neighbors and doing a neighborhood meeting notice and inviting them in to just brainstorm about what they think might be a good use of those parcels. And the broker is telling me that that will give us a little bit leg up when we actually, it's hard to market what we don't know. And I know that the Van Dyke piece did go to the Planning Commission, and there was some resistance on the Van Dyke piece to zone that commercial because they felt that we don't know what the project is, and we want a project before rezone. And so it's kind of the chicken and the egg thing. We're thinking maybe we should just take a stab at meeting with folks and seeing what they have in mind and seeing how it goes. I don't know, maybe the neighbors will be adamantly opposed to something different, but I think if it was a fire department before, it gives you a little latitude.
Ms. Coleman, being that I don't know that much about this, how many kinds of zoning are there?
Well, that's one of the things, we have a gradation of residential. So we have single family all the way up to multifamily and different density or number of units that can go on a parcel. Then we have our commercial classifications. We have limited business. We have kind of the business commercial, which is a little wider spectrum. Then we have industrial land, light industrial land. So there's a gradation of different uses. And so that would be one of the things that we would talk about with the neighbors is what do you see that looking like? Should we tear down the fire station, put 3 single-family homes on it? Doesn't bring us very much increased tax base, but it might bring 3 lovely, really nice homes. So that's kind of the discussion that we want to have. I think the site on McMenemy lends itself more to an office kind of use because it backs up to the business commercial on the freeway. London Lane, we think, is more conducive to multiple family housing. The Van Dyke one's a little more puzzling, except that there's business commercial across the street. And being on the roundabout, maybe some kind of limited business there or small commercial use at that site. So those are things that we're thinking about. But we kind of want to go out and test it. And I'm asking you, do you think that makes sense?
Well, what does medical fall under? And we did meet with one place, and they would be somewhere either medical or they'd be a school, one or the other. I mean, what's that considered?
The school can really go in any zoning district. It would be institutional use, so we would rezone it to allow that. The medical office would typically go in our business commercial areas. Could possibly go in the limited business depending on what they were doing. If it was a small medical office building, doctor office or something, that might work in limited business as well.
I will just say, I think it's a good idea to ask, but I think some guidance, for, I know there's medical places in Maplewood looking to move to other parts of Maplewood and things like that, where to have a zoning that's amenable, obviously, is helpful.
Yeah, I think the site on McMenemy might lend itself to that. The London Lane, maybe. I'm guessing the neighbors, you never know. You have to ask to see what they're thinking or what they might be comfortable having as a neighbor.
I'm not sure who was first over here. Councilmember Coleman.
I think you're on the right track. It's a good idea. You
Okay.
gotta go out and test the water, see what's going on.
Okay.
Best to find out from neighbors what their expectations are now, then bring something in the future, you get it shot down.
Yeah. One of the things that we learned on the Van Dyke piece when that purchase agreement went away was that the site was a little small. So even with if they got the neighbor's piece too, the vacant house that's boarded up next to it, it gets a little bit more marketable, but then it was just coming up a little short. So we also need to maybe look at the ordinance itself and look at setbacks and things to see if we can make that a little more flexible than what we currently have.
Sure.
Councilmember Abrams.
Thank you. I agree with Councilmember Copeland. I think it's a great idea to go out and talk to the citizens. I would suggest maybe making sure that you talk to the people about what the options are, because I know I agree with Mayor Slawik. I'm just learning about all of the different types of zoning possibilities that we have. And I think that if you can maybe have some handouts for people so that they can know what are the options and what do you think really fits into this particular
Right.
location, I think that's a great idea. I think it's very good. I like it.
Councilmember Junemann?
That's what I was going to suggest, was that you can have something where it's, not 8 pages, but bullet points of a zoning name, because people hear those things, and then what that means. And possibly in some cases, where we've done a piece that doesn't look like it belongs by residential, but we've made a change, and it's, not only is it there, but it's working, so they kind of get a feel for how it is when you make those changes, then they don't feel so, because I think a lot of people think the only 2 things in the world are residential and commercial. And commercial can mean so many things to so many people. So if we could get it, like even the limited business, I don't think a lot of people realize that exists. And so that's not as scary to a neighborhood as some other things could be. So I think it's a great idea.
that those are really good ideas, and I was just thinking maybe even in our neighborhood notification, could put that little summary so they could start thinking about
Right.
things. And another good tool would be to bring pictures
Yeah,
of what different things look like and how they fit in neighborhoods,
Right.
especially things that aren't typical. And, this is what it would look like, so they're not all like, wow, multifamily would be terrible. And we
Yes.
can't have that next to single family. Well, here we have a really nice development that's next to
Working.
single family. It can work if it's done appropriately and good design.
So I think the council's given you
Yeah.
good direction. I think, at least from South Maplewood and for the site on London Lane, we know that there's a lot of chatter about what's going to happen, right? And that whole site could be as large as 6 acres when you combine everything around there, so that's quite a large site. And so, is there anything else you need from us?
No, that's good. I just wanted to make sure that before we started spending staff time going off into the neighborhoods, that you were on board with us, because it would be labor intensive for us to be out there. But I think in the end, it's doing the work up front, so that when we do have a project, hopefully it'll be in line with what the neighbors are thinking, and it'll be easy to get the zoning done.
Councilmember Cardinal.
Thank you, Mayor. Melinda, on the Van Dyke thing here, I couldn't figure out how big that was by the picture.
It's just a tad under 2 acres.
Is there any way you could draw that, take that thing up there and draw it for us?
Yeah, we have the,
So defining exactly where it is, right?
Yeah, can maybe turn the other way. Well, yeah, that. One more time. Yeah, one more.
There you go.
That matches ours.
All right. A red marker or something, Melinda. I got a red pen, but
yeah, I just have a pencil, so
Get it
that's,
to show up on the camera.
All slow and it'll make a big dark line.
I think that would help. I think that would help if you put it on a sign.
Yeah.
How big it is, because it's hard to tell what it is. Now, we don't own the house next door, do we?
we do not.
Okay, so that's just, somebody could acquire that.
We would,
Wants to let it go, though.
yeah.
Yeah.
They're interested in selling, and that would be obviously a discussion that when we meet with those folks, that we would ask that owner to be represented at those meetings as well.
Good. Well, thank you. I think you have clear direction from the council, and
I do.
thank you for asking. And we look forward to hearing what happens out there through your meetings.
We will keep you posted. Thank you.
Next, our last item of business for the workshop is to hear a presentation from Director Guilfoyle and Acting City Manager Coleman on council conduct of city business. And if you are ready, Interim City Manager Coleman, are you going to introduce this item?
I am.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. Karen and I have been talking about this for quite some time, and we have been actually doing this presentation with our various advisory boards. And Karen and I have been tag teaming and meeting with our different groups and giving them a similar presentation that we'd like to give to you tonight. We're going to talk about 6 things. Conflict of interest, public meetings, Data Practices Act, public hearings, constituent questions, and social media, which is a big one these days. I'm just going to start with conflicts of interest, and Karen and I are going to kind of interact and take turns here. With conflict of interest, this is something that can happen from time to time with council members. And a conflict of interest, you can have a direct or an indirect personal or financial interest in any manner upon which you have the authority to make a decision. And any contract made in violation of the conflict of interest law is void. So if you have any kind of direct or indirect benefit from a decision that's coming before the council, you have to recuse yourself from voting. But if it's something that you still would benefit from, we can't even address it as a group. So that's a really important thing to understand. Conflict of interest, what does that really mean? It means that you cannot enter a contract where one member has a conflict of interest. And there are some ways where that's not the case. That's if the council member has no ownership in the company, the council member is not an officer or a director of the company, the council member does not receive commissions or bonuses, and the council member does not supervise a contract. So if those things are not in play, there is not a conflict of interest for the entire council. There are conflicts of interest that the city council can still do the project or still vote on. Those are situations where a conflict of interest where there's a non-contractual action. They may just be disqualified from voting, but the council can still take action. So in other words, you can recuse yourself, but the rest of the council can move on that. Steps for a conflicted council member in a non-contractual action: you need to disclose the conflict. You do not participate in the discussion on the vote, or you can leave the room. And I've seen this happen here at our council chambers where people have said, I can't talk about it, I can't take action, and I may have a potential conflict. So I think most of you are familiar with how that works. The gift law is also something that we wanted to touch on, and we've all heard about this quite a bit too over the years. The local officials cannot accept gifts from interested parties. The gift law is defined as a city elected or appointed officer, but all the cities that I know and have been involved in, we also equate that to city employees, that we are not allowed to take gifts either, that goes down to the employee level, and there has been case law on that is the case. A gift equals money, personal property, real property, some kind of service, or a loan or a forgiveness of debt. Interested person is anyone living or doing business in the city who is or could be impacted by a decision that you're going to make. Some examples of a gift law, and these are they might seem a little trivial, but when you attend a neighborhood barbecue or you're invited to something, just bring something to share and you're covered. If you're invited to attend a charity luncheon for free, just make yourself available to answer questions or offer to make a presentation or help in whatever the discussion is that evening, and you're okay to participate in that. The other thing is to just pay for your lunch. Say, I need to pay for my own lunch or whatever is going on at that event. Some exceptions to the gift law for council members are campaign contributions, receiving some kind of a plaque or service award, a trinket or item costing $5 or less, a food or beverage at a reception or a meeting where the local official is giving a speech or answering questions. And you can take gifts from your family if they're Maplewood residents. So that's good. The open meeting law is, Karen's going to talk about that a little bit, and then I'll jump back in to talk about a couple of the other issues.
The open meeting law is governed by state statute 13D, and all meetings of the city council, unless they are closed and can be closed under chapter 13, are considered open to the public. We're going to discuss what the inside room meeting means and the outside room meeting means. Inside room meetings would be a meeting here in the council chamber or a designated place where you're going to hold a regular council meeting. It's noticed by date, time, and location, and an agenda is posted. If it's a public hearing, notice is published in the paper, and for zoning matters, property owners within 500 feet are mailed a notice, and sometimes we've even gone farther in an area more than that if required by the city council if they've requested it. If a special meeting is called, 3 days notice is required. Special meetings can be called by the mayor or by 2 council members. Outside the room meetings are, this is not really defined in the open meeting law, but has been defined in case law, and it's where a quorum of the body is present. There should be no discussing or receiving information as a group outside of the room meeting unless it's a meeting that is open and agended. Information is related to official business. And some of this has gotten to be a little bit questionable, which we'll talk about in a couple slides here. The open meeting law, whereas it is in email, is when too many members are involved, results in a quorum. So that's why we always ask that you not hit reply all when you're discussing something with a city staff member or the city manager. When the message is received by the group and then there gets to be discussion back and forth in the email, it can be considered a daisy chain, and then it can be considered violation of the open meeting law, especially when the message contains information related to official business. Open meeting law, the meaning of meeting is when a quorum of the body is present, discusses, decides, or receives information as a group, and information is related to official business. Some lessons learned email should be used as follows: just to receive information from the city, one-way communication. It's not a violation of the open meeting law if we, staff, send you a message regarding something, a meeting that's coming up, or an update on something. Where you get into trouble is when you start responding and hitting that reply all. So we just direct that you never hit reply all. The other area that you have to be very careful is when you're between 2 members of the city council only can be discussing without forwarding or copying other members of the council. So for example, it's very dicey when 2 council members start to discuss something via email, and then one of those 2 council members then start discussing it with another council member, and that's chain reaction where you're talking about things and could possibly come to a decision, something that you really need to be careful of.
Councilmember Juenemann.
And the same thing is true of phone conversations.
Yes. We don't have any way as city staff, though, to monitor that. That's on the onus of the council.
I understand,
Right.
but if you do that and then someone else says, well, I talked to, and she talked to, and he talked to, it's the same thing, so.
That's
you can't.
correct, it is. Violations and penalties for the open meeting law are $300 for each occurrence, and the attorney's fees up to $13,000. That's via state statute, and removal from office for 3 or more violations. Another thing too is that the city cannot pay for this $300. That's on the onus of the council member. They have to pay that themselves. The general rule under data practices is that all data is public unless it fits under an exception. We started getting a lot of data requests back in 2006 to the point where we actually hired an individual to help monitor those and manage them, because there's many things that we have to go through when we get a data request. It can be very labor intensive, a lot of hours, because one thing that we don't want to do as a city is release anything that would be considered private data, because then there's a liability issue. So data is All data collected, created, received, maintained, or disseminated by the city, regardless of its physical form, storage media, or conditions of use that are considered public in Statute 13. All cities are required to have a responsible authority and a compliance officer to administer the act. For the city of Maplewood, I'm the responsible authority. However, we do have individuals in the police department that do, like the chief handles a lot of his, and then we just log them in our log. We also work with Human Resource Department for personnel issues. And we actually get quite a few lately for Public Works, and so Michael has had to spend a lot of time gathering information for Public Works. When people ask you specifically for data, you most definitely want to refer them directly to me, and then I will pass it on to whomever it needs to go to gather information. Do not provide the data yourself, because even those of us that deal with Chapter 13 quite frequently, we might need to call on Alan, or the League of Minnesota Cities to clarify an issue. I've even had to go to the Office of Administrative Hearings and get direction from them so that we do not release something that we should not be releasing. Property data complaint is protected and is non-public data, and personnel data, most personnel data is non-public data and is only available to those who need to have access. Law enforcement data is very factually dependent based on the information contained in police reports, but a lot of information that some would consider maybe should not be released is public data. Now we're going to speak a little. Are there any questions regarding that? Melinda is now going to speak about public hearings.
Before I get into this, I forgot to mention in my opening comments that Mayor Slawik asked me this morning, where did you get all this information? And where did it come from? And so I just wanted to let you know that I think Karen and I have both been in the business a long time, and this is something that in my other communities that I've worked in and in Maplewood, we try to do it once a year when we have new members on our advisory boards. And a lot of this information comes from state statutes, but it also comes from the League of Minnesota Cities, and then just the fact that we work with this every day, and we wanted to just share it with our different advisory boards in the council. So that's where the data came from.
I think Mayor Slawik was thinking, holy smokes, it's July.
We should have had this a little earlier. Yeah, it really should have been part of the orientation. So better late than never, as they say. With regard to public hearings, what kind of matters require public hearings? Most of our planning applications do. You see that on tonight's agenda, that the planning applications, usually the conditional use permits and those types of things, require a public hearing, so we have a couple of those this evening. In addition to that, when we order a public improvement project, we have a public hearing. When we adopt assessments, we have a public hearing. And then liquor license is one that the city also has public hearings on. Why is a public hearing important? It's part of our due process, and in that due process, which we owe to our community and our residents, we give notice. We allow them to take testimony, we allow them to weigh in on the proposal, and we create a record. And that record becomes very important, especially if we're working with conditional use permits, where we're putting conditions on that property to make sure that it's properly developed and it protects the people who live around that facility. And if we should get into court for any reason, we have a record of the proceedings and how the public hearing was held and who spoke and what actions were taken. Public hearings are important. It's part of our due process. It's guaranteed in the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. It's also included in the Minnesota Constitution. And as I mentioned, it gives people an opportunity to present their case when a property interest is at stake. And I think that's one of the #1 things that make local government really feel like we're doing a good job, and we do that well. We do it a lot better than different levels of government because we can directly relate to our residents, and we allow them an opportunity to speak. Some of the lessons learned about public hearings is you come to the public hearing with your mind not made up. You're open to hearing. the evidence that's going to be presented at the public hearing, and that you don't advocate for against a matter until there is a public hearing. In addition, it's best if you remain an impartial decision maker. So in other words, you let the public hearing unfold and you listen to the testimony and what people have to say, the developer, the applicant, what staff has to say, and what residents have to say, and then you deliberate as a group and make a decision. If we don't have any questions on that, I'm going to let Karen go back to the social media aspect, and then I'll close with some of our constituent issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Melinda. How many people are on Facebook that are on the council? You may not want to answer, I don't know. But we're going to talk a little bit about the dangers of Facebook and how you can get into open meeting law violations in using Facebook. We're going to also talk about how that impacts the Data Practice Act, public hearing violations, and promises, admissions made in a public forum. If you are violating the open meeting law on Facebook, if you are friends on Facebook with a quorum of the city council member and the three of you discuss or opine about official business that has come or may come before the council for a decision. So even if you have the option of liking something, if all three of you like it, that could be, if three of you at the same issue, it could be seen as an open meeting law violation. What if you just want to agree with someone else that's posted on their Facebook page? Any response that you make may be a violation of the open meeting law because you do not know how many other council members are reading the post. One response is probably okay. Two responses is likely a violation. And I do want to say that this is something that we've never given presentations like this to our council or our boards or our commissions, but Melinda brought it up to me and I said, it's an excellent idea. And so I think that we will be doing this on an annual basis because I know for sure every year there are new laws that are passed that affect Chapter 13 in the Data Practices Act because it's just gotten to be more and more prevalent, these requests, as technology increases. And so we will continue to do this on an annual basis, bringing you the new law changes as well. Reasons not to be the first to announce information to the public. You might be wrong or not exactly right, or you might get your opinion in there a little bit more than you should. If the matter is pending, you cannot speak on behalf of the council. For example, don't worry, your application is a slam dunk. I can't imagine that any of you would do that. But as one member, you have no power. Together, you have all the power. I'm not real keen on that particular that statement, but okay. More reasons not to be the first to announce information to the public as plans change. Sometimes when we have different things that come before the council, you might send it back to the planning commission or to another commission to review it, and so something might change. It might not yet be public. Announcement might be harmful to negotiations. For example, if you're talking about something in a closed session, you want to be very, very careful that you keep it into the closed session. Social media, everything you post on Facebook is subject to the Data Practices Act. And so admissions of mistakes by city staff or promises to fix situations or advocating for or against a pending application is something you most definitely do not want to do. And everything that you say can be used against you if there is an open meeting law violation. They can, subpoena your records, etc. So we don't want any of that to happen. And I'm sure that you don't either. And Melinda is going to close us out and talk about constituent questions. Are there any questions on the social media or open meeting law? Yes, Mayor.
Maybe I should ask this at another time, but I guess I will go here. There was a state senator that posted over the weekend that they had their Senate account and they had their personal account, and they asked people to please not post issues related to the state on their personal account because they use it for their family and friends and so forth. So is that distinction really relevant?
Mayor and members of the council, I certainly would not feel qualified to answer that because I can tell you that we've ran into things here where we have had situations because this technology is what's getting people in trouble. And so I guess caution is the biggest thing. And then if you want to address anything else related to that, Alan, I would defer to you.
Sure, thanks, Karen. I just would keep them as separate as possible. I mean, to the extent that you can't keep people from posting issues of, say, Maplewood flavor on, let's say, your personal Facebook feed because they've found you, right? Don't respond at all. I mean, don't even say, hey, please put this somewhere else. I've got a public, I've got a hat-wearing Facebook account that has Mayor Slawik in charge of it. I wouldn't respond at all, pretend like it didn't happen. And to the extent that you want to be on social media, try to put yourself out there with that public persona so that only things, that's what that feed is for. But I wouldn't engage at all and try to keep your personal as personal as possible.
So Attorney Cantrud, you just advocated that I do not respond to those, correct?
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you, council.
Thank you. I wanted to touch a base on constituent questions and issues that can be problematic for council members and just talk a little bit about that and how we would prefer that they be addressed. First of all, there are different kinds of things that we get involved with, and one of them is nuisances, and those are animal issues, which we've heard a lot about animals lately, noise, and odors. Recreational fires are one that we get calls on a regular basis. And snow plowing, and hopefully we won't have snow plowing for a few months, but we had a lot of snow plowing calls this year, a lot of site triangle issues, and people who were concerned about how we were doing that job. So those are the kinds of calls that we typically get. In addition to that, we have problem properties, another one that we spend quite a bit of time on. Vacant buildings, weeds, tall grass, excess vehicles, and just junk in yards. We get a lot of those kinds of calls. We also, usually in the fall around truth and taxation time and while we're working on the budget, we'll get questions about taxes. With our street improvement projects, we get a lot of public participation. Assessments typically bring out a lot of people, although with the way that Mr. Thompson conducts the meetings with the neighborhoods, we've found that they haven't been quite as adversarial as they have been in the past. We also have questions when we are proposing public facilities or we're talking about our ice arena or the community center or park development. And we'll get people who are concerned about how we're going about that. What should we do when we get these kinds of questions? The first thing is to discern whether it's a public or a private matter. If it's a private matter, then it's not a city issue. For example, the tree's hanging over my property line, or I need to know where my boundary is. I think that the person next door is building into my property. That's not something that we get involved in. That's a private property issue. So if that's the case, then we go to number 2, which is where we believe it's important to identify the area of concern by department. Is it a public safety concern, a public works concern, a planning, economic development kind of thing? Planning application or building permit issue. The finance department or public works would field questions on the budget or assessments. And then of course park and recreation or MCC issues. Those are things that should be identified either by you if you know where that should go, or give them to the city manager and we can funnel that to the right person to address that.
Hey, Councilmember Juenemann.
Yeah, as somebody who feels like I've been sitting here for 100 years, it is very typical for people to want you to know about this. And my policy always has been, it's like, well, thank you for sharing, but I can't do anything about it either way. And if it's questionable whether it's a city matter or not, I just tell them to call the appropriate department, and they'll tell you if the city can help you or not. And if not, it's yours to try and resolve. But the worst thing in the world anyone of us can do is get involved in a private conversation, even if it involves a city issue. It's just, people see, if you say one word, they see it as absolute truth about the city, and that isn't usually the way it goes.
That's true. Some of the, I guess, the practices, I've seen it here in Maplewood, is that if you do get that kind of call, and you will, and especially when there's a new mayor or a new council member, people want to know if you're going to be there to help them. Our position is if you can forward it to the appropriate department head and copy me, and that person is usually, we're very responsive department managers who really want to solve problems. So we usually will take care of that, and then when we have it resolved, we'll let you know that it's been resolved. We really do strongly suggest that you don't try to solve the problem yourself for some of the reasons Councilmember Juenemann pointed out, but there is always so many sides to the story. It's sometimes 2, sometimes 3 or 4. So usually the department heads or someone at the city will have that background that you're not privy to, so it's best just to pass it on to us, and it really actually makes things go quicker if you pass those on.
Manager Coleman, today somebody called me about the glass at the racquetball courts at MCC and suggested I call the glass company. So,
Yes.
right? I would
And
not do
that's
that.
not your position to do that.
No,
That
so I
would be-
called the Parks and Recreation Director, right?
Yes,
That was-
that's the correct way to
Okay.
do that. And, you know, you are going to get a lot of residents who feel like this, that you're there to connect with them on their concerns, and that's perfectly fine. You want to hear from people, and we want to help them. But city staff are the best people to do that. And really, we're doing you a favor and the resident a favor by getting the proper department head hooked in and getting the problem solved, and then looping back with you to tell you how that was accomplished. If you don't have any questions, that's it. But thank you for allowing Karen and I to do the presentation. I think Karen's right in that we will be a little more diligent about meeting with our boards and trying to keep up with some of the changing technology issues.
Thank you, very
Thank you.
helpful. And with that, council have a 10-minute break and start at 7 o'clock. We are adjourned.
Oh, okay.